a woman who supposedly haunted the halls of Danvers State Hospital for 20 years has become one of the most famous ghosts in America. But when we look at the details of her case, we find that there is more to the story than meets the eye. So join me today as we explore the strange tale of the Lady in Black. It's me, and this is my channel. Join me today as we explore the strange and sometimes spooky side of history. In the town of Danvers, Massachusetts, not far from Salem, stands the former Danvers State Hospital. This building was once a bustling center for mental health care in the northeastern United States. But today it is long abandoned and rumored to be one of the most haunted places in America. And all because of one woman. Her name was Annie Palmer, or so she told people when she checked herself into the hospital on October 7th, 1884. She said that she had been experiencing delusions and hearing voices, which led her to kill 2 people. This might sound like something out of an episode of The Twilight Zone, but it was far from the only case of its kind during the late 19th century. Medical science knew little about mental illness back then. In fact, it wasn't until 1896 that the term schizophrenia was coined by Swiss psychiatrist Eugene Blum. Because of this, many who suffered from what we would call mental illness today were instead diagnosed with general paresis, dementia, and paralysis. The symptoms of these conditions varied widely, but they always included insanity. And as a result, hospitals like Danvers became dumping grounds for those who displayed any signs of insanity. One such person was Annie Palmer, who was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. Over the course of the next few years, she was shuffled between several different hospitals, including McLean Asylum in Waverly, Massachusetts, where she was lobotomized in 1933 in one of the earliest known cases of the procedure being performed on a woman. But it did not help her condition, and she was transferred back to Danvers just 3 years later. There was a problem, though. By this point, the staff at Danvers knew very little about Annie's past and did unknow how to treat her. For some reason, they believed that she was a nymphomaniac and forcibly sterilized her without telling anyone, including her own mother. As the years passed, Annie became increasingly violent. She attacked other patients and even hospital staff, all while screaming that she was hearing voices that commanded her to do terrible things. Then, on March 7th, 1961, she killed again. This time, her victim was a fellow patient named Mary Earlett, whom she beat to death with a hammer. When asked why she did it, Annie replied, "I don't know." A doctor asked if she was having auditory hallucinations, to which she replied, "No, not now," before bursting into tears. Annie was tried for second-degree murder, but because of her insane status, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent back to Danvers to await transfer to another hospital. She spent 2 years there before finally being moved to Taunton State Hospital, where she lived quietly until her death on August 1st, 1964. Her body was cremated and her ashes scattered, leaving behind no grave marker and almost no trace of her ever having existed at all. Except that isn't true. There is one place where she lives on haunting the halls of Danvers State Hospital. Or is there? Over the years, stories began circulating about a mysterious lady in black who appeared in the windows of the old hospital. She was always the same, a woman wearing a long nightgown or perhaps a Victorian nightgown, walking through the halls or sitting at the window. Some claimed that she looked sad and lonely, while others claimed that she seemed angry and bitter. In addition to the sightings, people reported hearing strange sounds coming from inside the abandoned building. Footsteps echoed through the empty halls. Whispers seemed to come from nowhere and doors slammed shut on their own. To some, it was obvious that these sounds were caused by the ghost of Annie Palmer, whose story had become local legend. But when we examine the evidence, we find that there may be another explanation. For starters, the first mention of the Lady in Black comes not from inside the hospital itself, but from outside it. In 1971, a reporter for the Boston Record-American wrote an article detailing the history of Danvers State Hospital. In it, he mentions the story of the Lady in Black, claiming that she is the ghost of a former nurse who died in the basement of the hospital. Now, this may sound a bit suspicious, but the man's name was John B. Lomascalo. And while he might have embellished his stories a bit, for the sake of sensationalism, he was also the curator of the Peabody Essex Museum, a well-known historian and the author of 12 books on the history of New England. So it's unlikely that he was making the whole thing up. And that's not all. 1. Elizabeth B. Peabody wrote a story about the Lady in Black for Reader's Digest in 1959. That story featured the same basic details as the one given by Mr. Lau, except she names the dead nurse Mabel. What's interesting is that while Mabel's death is mentioned, there is no record of a woman by that name working at the hospital. As for Annie Palmer, she was mentioned in neither story. Nor was she ever mentioned in any published account of the hospital's history until a local paranormal investigator named Richard H. Tucker wrote a book entitled Ghosts of Danvers State Hospital. In it, he tells the story of Annie Palmer and claims that her ghost is responsible for the hauntings at the hospital. Richard does a good job of weaving together Annie's story with the various legends surrounding the hospital, painting a picture of a troubled woman who simply couldn't find peace even in death. But again, there's no hard evidence that Annie was ever a patient at Danvers. The best we can do is speculate that she might have been. For starters, the dates match up. Annie was declared insane in 1884 and remained institutionalized for the rest of her life. During that time, there was no record of her being released, which is exactly when the sightings of the Lady in Black begin. Then, when Annie died in 1964, the sightings stopped. Unfortunately, this isn't enough to prove anything. The truth is that we don't know what happened to Annie after she was declared insane. It is possible that she spent the remainder of her life at McLean Asylum or one of the other institutions where she was held, or perhaps she was sent to Danvers. We simply don't know. Even if she was at Danvers, however, it doesn't necessarily mean that she was the Lady in Black. After all, the story of the Lady in Black predates Annie's arrival there by nearly 20 years. And as I mentioned earlier, the name Mabel is mentioned in connection with the ghost. So who was the Lady in Black? Was it Mabel, Annie, or someone else entirely? Perhaps there were multiple women who fit the description. When it comes to the other alleged hauntings at Danvers, such as the footsteps and whispering voices, I'm much less convinced. These are relatively common experiences for anyone visiting an old, abandoned building like Danvers State Hospital. There are several videos on YouTube that feature investigators exploring the hospital, and every single one contains a story of footsteps or voices being heard. But there is a much more mundane explanation for these sounds. As anyone who's ever explored an abandoned building can tell you, pipes are almost always to blame. As water flows through them, it creates sounds that humans interpret as footsteps or voices. Take this video, for example. Here, a metal pipe is producing a sound remarkably similar to a footstep. Now imagine that the pipe was located under the floorboards and covered by carpet. The sound might be even more convincing. Now, obviously, I couldn't say with 100% certainty that all of the sounds recorded at Danvers State Hospital can be explained in this way, but it is a possibility that should not be ignored. The same is probably true of the doors slamming shut on their own. Most old buildings settle over time, and as they do, the doors can get misaligned and slam shut. All it takes is a slight breeze to push them open, just enough to get started. All of this is to say that while the history of Danvers State Hospital is certainly dark and disturbing, there is no evidence to support the claim that Annie Palmer haunts the halls. Even if she did, however, it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. After all, she endured a great deal of pain and suffering in life, and perhaps she deserves a bit of peace in death. Thank you for watching! Which do you think is responsible for these strange happenings at Danvers State Hospital? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you next time.